know anyone who's considering joining for Saita, Saita is obviously the topic is interesting. Saita is an interesting subject, but the Masechta encompasses a tremendous amount of other subjects. It strays very far from the topic. And it's a nice place to start.
Lots of pictures in the textbook.
Certainly not Saita.
Oh.
Very, very, very interesting Masechta. It covers a very wide range of things, much more than just the Saita. A lot of Agad Gemara, and it's short, 48 dafin. You'll finish before Shavuos. So it's a great place to start. It's a very enjoyable Masechta, and it's not too heavy. It's pretty light.
Go to state.
Yeah, it's a lot easier than the Dvarim and Nazir.
Cheery news for the simple folk.
Okay, we're on Samach Dalet Amud Beis 64b. Okay, and again, the subject today is Tumah and Tahara, as Eric mentioned. You will also be talking about rotting flesh. Okay.
Otherwise known as the precious bodily fluids chapter.
Okay, now it's interesting. What is the source for what we're about to learn? It's not clear. It's not clear what the source is. Taisus sort of straggles between saying that this is the accepted tradition, and combining with trying to provide reasoning. So one of the ideas here is as follows. If somebody's buried someplace permanently, this typically happens in a cemetery, right? Most people interred in a cemetery are interred with the intention that they will never be reinterred somewhere else. You're not allowed to move them. What happens if somebody is interred in let's say on the battlefield or some sort of temporary, he died on the roads and they buried him immediately? Presumably because, especially in times of old, it wasn't exactly safe to travel with a decaying body, and there's no refrigeration. So often you might bury somebody, but mark the gravesite and intend at some later point to reinter them in a proper cemetery. So what makes a cemetery? What makes a temporary internment site? So we'll see that if anybody's been to the new Har Menuchos cemetery, the new Har Menuchos is the part where they've been interring people maybe for 15 years, maybe 10 to 15 years. So I don't know if anyone's been to Jerusalem. There's two cemeteries in Jerusalem. There's the one that's outside the city and the one that's in the city. Three actually, and there's one that's on the other side of the Arab side of the city. There's Har Zaysim, there's Sanhedria, and there's Har Menuchos. Har Menuchos is sort of the government created a cemetery, and it's a very, very popular cemetery, although obviously nobody's running to join it. But it's sort of pushed out on the outskirts of the city, and it was growing, and as we'll soon see in the Gemara, there is concern that we don't want all of Israel to turn into one gigantic cemetery. So at some point, the government decided that instead of expanding the territory of the cemetery, they're going to change the way they bury people. And what's done today is that people joke about it, they call it long-term parking. They literally built a parking garage. There's many floors, and in every floor there is a long grave site at multiple levels. So you can walk into a room sort of, and there are 5 levels vertically along a wall with many different spots where deceased bodies can be interred, can be buried. This is sort of the sort. We're not going to go into the halacha whether this is identical to times of yore or not, but it is certainly very similar to what was done in the past. If anybody's been to the Sanhedria Park, which was called Sanhedria Park because archaeologists think it might be the place where the members of Sanhedrin were buried. There might be some old, mosaics and writings that might indicate that way. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. It's speculation. It's all speculation. But if you see this, you can see this type of burial place. They call it a kuchen. Kuchen is sort of they dug an underground room. It was 8 amas. It was 8 amas by 4 amas. And along the walls, on the 8 amma wall, they'd bury six bodies. On the 4 amma wall, they'd bury three bodies. If you have the art scroll, you got the picture on the bottom. Yeah, highly recommend if anyone has an art scroll to look at the pictures. Okay, 4x8, and there are oftentimes so there was this room. You'd come into the room sort of from above ground. You'd enter the room. There was an antechamber, so there would be a room that was 6x6, and that room would lead into multiple kuchen sites. So in that room, they might have built 2 kuchen at opposite ends. Maybe they built 4, right? Two this way and 2 that way. Okay. Now the question is, we find the body. We want to know, is this body buried in a cemetery? Is this an official Beis HaKvaros, Beis HaChayim, depending on what you want to call it, or is it a single body that's buried? And the difference here is, if it was buried in a cemetery, presumably it was buried with permanent intention. If it was buried if it was buried on its own, presumably it was temporary, and then the body can be reinterred in a cemetery. That's much of the discussion for today. They find a person who's buried normally. So if you want to reinter it, you take the body and you also take the tfusa. That's the soil around the body. We'll define that later today. Okay, what happens if you find 2 bodies? Shnayim, noitlan ve'es tfusasan. You take them and the tfusa. We'll explain that later, like we said. Matzah shloisha. Let's say you find 3 bodies. Im yesh ben zel lezeh midalad amis v'ad shmeina harei zeh shchunas kvaros. If they're buried in no closer than, so let's say if you find them 3 in a row, obviously that would be presumably one of the walls of the kuchen, of this burial style. I don't know what they call this. What do they call it? Catacombs.
It's called a burial chamber.
Okay, whatever it is.
Yeah.
This
Sarcophagus? Nah, that's
no,
not it.
but it's above ground burial. Okay, whatever it is, they would bury that. So then presumably this is a wall of people that were buried. Now,
Rabbi,
if they're buried at a
catacombs,
distance, let's say they're buried 2 here and 1 here, so you want to measure from the 2 to the 1. If it's 4 amis or 8 amis, maybe it's a burial chamber. But if they're buried not in a line, but they're buried less than 4 amis apart, presumably it is not a burial chamber. And the reason for that is very simple, because if they were buried closer than 4 amis but not in a line, there's no way they would have fit into the chamber, unless obviously we're talking about the corner, right? If you have 2 people buried, 3 people all buried parallel to each other, but one of so you have 2 bodies this way and 1 body this way. In that case, it wouldn't make sense that it's a cemetery. There's no understanding of how those bodies would fit into a kuchen. So therefore, if it's within 4 to 8, then we say it's a kuchen, harei zeh shchunas kvaros. It's considered a shchunas kvaros, a cemetery, and therefore you can't reinter them. Once I know it's a cemetery, then now I want to check to make sure that I don't find any other cemetery, any other kuchen in this area. In other words, this might be a cemetery that has one of these chambers. It might be a cemetery that has 10 of them. What do? You check for the next 20 amas. What's the calculation of 20 amas? So we have a chamber is 4x8, an antechamber is 6x6. So you have 8 plus 6 is what? 14. The antechamber is 8. It's 22. It's a little bit of a problem, right? Math doesn't chop. It should be 22. Taisus raises this dilemma, and Taisus points out we're talking here about a situation where 2 of the bodies, or more of the bodies, were the bodies of infants. And this could be either, fortunately, we live in a time that God blessed us that we have an exceedingly low amount of infant mortality, childhood mortality. It's unbelievably low. But for most of humanity, that wasn't the case. A good percentage of children did not make it to adulthood. Once, they say life expectancy was 42, but once you made it to 20 years old, you're going to live to 70. Because tremendous amount of people died in childbirth. So it's extremely common. There's a famous rabbi who wrote a diary. There aren't that many diaries that exist. He lived about 400 years ago, 300 years ago. What was his name? Yaakov Emden wrote a diary.
My goodness, the year of Yaakov Emden.
The year of Yaakov Emden, Yavitz. He wrote a diary. I think he had 13 children from 3 wives. One of his wives died in childbirth, 1 died from illness, and I think only 7 of his kids made it to adulthood of 13. So anyway, but it was quite common. So you have you had unfortunately a cemetery. You had a tremendous amount of young children, infants, stillborns, very, very common. Baruch Hashem, we don't have that today. Anyway, so we're talking. So they had kuchen that were developed for children because it was so common. So we're talking here about one of the kuchen were for children. So in other words, the three bodies they found were children's bodies. And the Gemara presumes that when they would build, so again, they would build this antechamber of 6 by 6, and one kuch on one side and one on the other side. One of them would be for kids, the other one would be for adults. So therefore, we presume a radius of 20 amas and not 22 amas, because the ones for children were smaller. So it would be 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 8, which is 20. Instead of a 4 by 8, it would be a 4 by 6. And that's 20 amas. So now you have to do a 20 amma radius. Well, since according to Taisus, maybe it's a little bit different than that. 20, you have to check within 20 ammas. Let's say you find another one, another burial location. Then you have to check another 20 ammas. Maybe there's another one. Once you find 3 bodies together and you keep on searching within 20 ammas to keep on finding more bodies, you need to keep on checking, because now there is a suspicion that you're really inside an ancient cemetery, or ancient might not be appropriate, it might be just an old cemetery. Things move around pretty quickly then. Okay, and because if you found one body alone, then you'd be allowed to remove it with the earth. Amar of Yehudah, Motzi, you found it. Prat lemotzi. If it was identified, meaning you were traveling on the road and you see an identified grave marker, then it's different. You cannot move it. You presume he was buried there permanently. Again, what's the source of this? Taisus is sort of goes back and forth whether or not this is a tradition or whether there's some sort of logic behind it. I think in this first instance, Taisus says it is. This seems to be a halacha. Okay, mace, a dead body. Prat lahorog, somebody who was executed. The body clearly has scars of execution. In that case, we presume he was buried there permanently. Mushkav, resting. Prat liyoshev, if he was buried sitting. Kedarkai, normally. Prat l'sharoshe munach ben yarchaisav, if his head was buried between his feet. Why? Tani ula bar chanina. Okay. Wait a moment. Tani ula bar chanina. Meis shechaser and leitfutsa v'lo shchunas kfaras. If you have a dead body that's missing parts, then we don't have the rule of shchunas kfaras. Shchunas kfaras is only when we find a complete body. If the body is missing parts, it doesn't count as one of the 3 bodies that determine maybe this is a cemetery. The kol hani my timer. What's the reason for all of this? My time alone, reading. Why don't we suspect it's a cemetery? Dilma Oivik Chavnu. We suspect that this is a non-Jewish burial site, and therefore one is permitted to reinter all the bodies and move them elsewhere. Oh. Okay, Taisus points out that the scenario of Ula, where the body isn't complete, that would be a halacha, that would be a tradition. It's the other situations when the body isn't buried normally, we suspect it's not a Jewish body. Now, I don't want to go into anything here, any political subjects, but we'll just say, interesting fact is that Israel has been inhabited for over 5,000 years, and over 5,000 years, many people have died, and they've been buried in all sorts of places, and most of those places we have no clue where they are. Yeah. And it does happen quite frequently that they're doing a construction project, and they find dead bodies, and sometimes the bodies are buried like Jewish bodies, but most of the times they're not. Many times they're buried with idols. And there's sort of big debate within the Eidah Haredis, that's what they call the ultra-Orthodox Haredi community. These are the people that don't vote; they don't participate in the government. So they're one of the rabbis there is Rav Moshe Sternbach. He was formerly the chief rabbi of South Africa.
Yeah, isn't it about chief rabbi?
He was chief rabbi of Johannesburg. Oh, he wasn't. What was he?
He was in Johannesburg.
He was in Johannesburg. Okay, he was a rabbi in Johannesburg. In Johannesburg. So he's a rabbi. He was a former rabbi in Johannesburg. He later joined the Eidah Haredis as a rabbi. He is of the opinion that almost all of these burial sites are non-Jewish burial sites because of all these things. They're buried the wrong way. They're buried not like a Jewish burial. They're buried with idols in many cases.
But Israel has had, and you see in the Torah, the long
yes,
of
exactly,
time where
and
idol worship
yes,
dominated.
yes, and the other opinion sort of is that we have to suspect these might be Jewish bodies, and therefore it's much more complicated if you can reinter them or not, and it's a complicated question. Okay. Matzah Shnayim, you find two bodies. Rosh Shalzeb, B'tzad Margalois of Shalzeb. Rosh Shalzeb, B'tzad Margalois of Shalzeb. They're buried backwards. So one's head is by one's feet is by one's head. Ein lahem tfusa v'lo shkunas kvaros. They do not have the rules of tfusa or shkunas kvaros. In other words, you don't even have to take the soil with them when you reinter them. Why not? Seems to be a tradition. That's what the Rashbam says in Tosfos. Matzah shloisha. You find three bodies. Echad yidua u'shnayim tchila. One of the bodies is clearly marked. So you're going down a road, there's a marking spot of one body. You dig around it, you find two more. Or the opposite. So one is echad yidua shnayim tchila. One is marked, two of them are first discovery. Or the opposite. Shnayim tchila, two of them are marked. I'm sorry. Hold on, it changes here. Hold on a second. Echad tchila u'shnayim yiduan. One of them is initially discovered, but two of them are clearly marked. Ein lahem tfusa ve'ein lahem shkunas kvaros. That those that were discovered they don't even have the law of tfusa. You don't even have to take the earth with them when you reinter them, and it doesn't count as a potential cemetery. Ma'aser Rabbi Shaviv, there's a story with Rabbi Shaviv, shebolek u'matzah shnayim yiduan ve'echad tchila. He found two spots that were clearly marked, ve'echad tchila, and one that was not marked, and he wanted to make them into a cemetery. This excavation you're doing to determine whether or not there are other bodies interred in this area is for naught. The law of a presumptive cemetery is only three marked bodies or three unmarked bodies. When you mix the marked and the unmarked, there is no law of shkunas kvaros. Yeah, this is potentially a halacha, a tradition. The sort of logic here would be that if you bury somebody in a cemetery and they're not marked, probably non-Jewish burial. In other words, you have marked graves and they couldn't mark the other grave. Yeah. So presumably that's not a Jewish burial and you could just take it, just reinter it. Okay. You take them and you take the earth with them. What is tfusa? Amar Yehudah Amar Kra v'nesasani mitzrayim. This is Yaakov Avinu making Yosef promise to remove him from Egypt. In other words, Yaakov died in Egypt. He wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, so he told them, "Unesasani mi Mitzrayim, take me from Mitzrayim." But it also means take me with Mitzrayim. Take the earth that was around me that when I was buried and reinter that in Israel. Toil imi v'kamashir. How much do you have to take with? Tfusa. Pirish Rabbi Dovid Yehudah noitel offer techuach v'chayfer b'bsula gimel etzbais. You take all the earth around the body, around the frame, and also you dig with karka basula. They call this virgin earth or bedrock, I think is the English word for this. You dig in the bedrock 3 etzbais. That's what is that? It's roughly less than 3 inches, 2.5 inches, whatever, 2 inches. And you take 2 inches of virgin earth, and that combines, and that's also reinterred. Okay, hold on a second. Meisvei, I have a question. The kama shir tfusa. What's the measurement of tfusa? Pirush Rabbi Dovid Yehudah explained. Noitel a kismin ve'esa ksosis. Take a moment. Just what does the article translate? Kismin is these small pieces of wood, and I think sosis are small rocks or pebbles. Clumps of earth. So you take the clumps of earth and the clumps of wood, and then what you do is as follows: V'zorik es havadon. Anything that's certainly earth and has no residue at all of deceased body is removed. You keep that where it is. Don't reinter it. Umaniach es asvekas. But anything that's a suffix, meaning it potentially can be part of the casket or the dead body, that's put in that's put in for reinterment. And the remains of the body combine for the measurements of a dead body. In other words, like we said, not every dead body is tamei, especially once it's been buried for many, many years. It could very often be the body's nearly decomposed or entirely decomposed or partially decomposed. So you'd probably be going by the measurements. In other words, you wouldn't say this is a complete dead body because it's almost certainly not complete. As a matter of fact, I have a family friend that lives next to they built a building next to an ancient burial site. And at some point, a bunch of rabbis were there surveying the site, and they discovered a cavern that was formerly used to bury bodies that was adjacent to this guy's apartment. So the guy's apartment was cut out of rock, and literally right adjacent to the apartment is this huge cavern. And they investigated the cavern. I don't know how they got into it, and they discovered that they said there's nothing left, zero. There's no, they couldn't find any.
Were they moved or did it all just disintegrate?
Disintegrated. Buried 2,000 years ago, nothing left.
Mhm.
So they said, if you cut a wall right over here, you'll have an extra bedroom. And that's what he did. He cut a room. Apparently, I think there was like a window and entrance somewhere else. He cut a room, and he has an extra room in his house. Cut into the concrete, cut into the stone. I think the other entrance he turned into a window. Anyway. But that's what happens over time. So if you have whatever's left of the body, it's going to count for either a majority of the bones or a majority of the mass, or potentially to a measurement of rekef, now of rot. Now, this is a difficulty that Tosfos addresses and many others address. If anyone remembers, the law of rot was extremely narrow. It was only if you buried a body in a marble casket and there was nothing else buried with the body. Otherwise, we say it becomes galgalan. It basically ends the concept of rot. The rot is mixed in with earth, and it's not tummy. So one of the versions here is that it's subject to debate. This brisa disagrees. Okay, be that as it may here, it's very clear that tfusa has a different definition. Tfusa is not virgin earth, but it's sort of the earth that's buried with the mace, with the dead body. He goes, so the Gemara says it's a machlokes, it's a debate. He goes with the other opinion. The Tanya we learned the kama shir tfusa. What's the measurement of tfusa? You take the earth around the body. In the name of Ben Azai says you take 2 inches of virgin earth. That's tfusa, and therefore, why 2 inches? By the way, because that's sort of the amount of absorption from the dead body. How do we know that? That's a tradition. You check 20 amas. Amar Rava, it says Rava, bodak ve'eshkach. So the guy was on the side of a road. I don't know why he was digging. He was digging. Maybe he had to go to the bathroom. He dug and he finds a burial spot. So what did he do? He digs out the whole burial spot and he reinterrs it. And then he started digging again next to it, and he finds another one, and the same thing. He reinterrs it, and then he finds a third one. You don't reinter this last body. You don't move it. And the 2 bodies that were moved, you don't bring them back. Keep everything as it is. Ikad Amri, some say, a different version. Amar Rava says, once, now that you only found one at a time, you can reinter the third one as well. Let's make it into a shunas kvaros. Let's say this is a cemetery. So as he pointed out, Israel's been a place that's been inhabited for many years, and there have been many, many cemeteries, and we don't know where they all are. And therefore, we have to be careful about making these laws about deciding what is a cemetery. Because if we're too machmir, if we're too stringent, we'll turn the whole Israel into a cemetery. And say that Kohen can't walk anywhere. So whenever we have a leniency, we're lenient. And this is one of the examples of the leniencies. Elo, they found a reason, and Tiur Eretz Yisrael, they made pure the land of Israel. So we shouldn't presume everywhere is a cemetery. And therefore, because we say that they weren't found all at once, we're lenient and we say you can reinter it. You check 20 amas and you didn't find a body. What's the halacha? Okay, our school has a different version here. They go with the Rosh. I'll go with Tosfos here because we usually go with Tosfos. Tosfos says, so typically you understand, if you find 3 bodies that are shaped in a kuch, you have to check 20 amas. What does 20 amas mean? Presumably means a radius, right? What happens if you checked only one direction of the 20 amas? So even if we could say maybe it doesn't just mean a radius, maybe it means 90-degree intervals, right? So it'd be 4 places.
So when you say 20 amas, is that from the exterior of the body, or
the exterior?
Where's the radius point?
Okay, good question. So it would be from the logical point of potential internment. So it would be, you'd have to figure out the way they're buried. Where is the kuch? And what would potentially the kuch be? And then it would be the kuch is 4 by 8. So on the 8th axis, it would be an additional 16 amas. And again, we're talking about it's really not 4 by 8, it's 4 by 6 because we're talking about a kuch of infants, so of children. So it would from wherever you can draw the rectangle, it would be additional 16 amas in either way. Plus, the local kuch as well, however it would look. Let's say you only checked it in one direction. What's the halacha? Rabbi Nazir bar Yirmiyah Amarav shkunas kvaros. 1 second. Again, this is Taisa's version of the Gemara. Art Scroll brings down Rosh, which is a little different. So Taisa says you checked one direction, you didn't find anything. Shkunas kvaros, meaning what you found, that's tamei, everything else is fine. My timer, Amar Shlakish Ilo Matzav Yisrael. You don't have to check a 20 amma radius. You need to check 20 amas in one direction, the most logical direction. You check 20 amas, you don't find anything. Ilo Matzu, they found an excuse, and they were Mitahar or Yisrael. They wanted to keep the Tumah as a secret Tumah. And if you're a Nazir, it won't bother you if they find it as a secret Tumah, or for anything else for that matter. Kol Safik Nigam Betchila Tahar. Okay, now if you remember the previous mission, we spoke a little bit about chazakas, presumptions. We spoke about Mitzayr, a nega. A guy who's mitzvah, he gets a leprous blemish. Now, the way you become tamei is you get a blemish, and then it grows, or white hair grows inside of it. Let's say 2 people came to you, Reuven and Shimon. To make it easier, it was Reuven and Reuven. Okay, Reuven and Reuven, 2 people with the identical name. One guy has a nega the size of a quarter, and the other one the size of a nickel. You come back a week later, and they both have a nega the size of a quarter. One of them is obviously tamei. One of them is not tamei. He's hezger. He's locked up. He goes back to be locked up for a week to see if it will grow again. Okay, which one is it? They both have the same name. Which Reuven is it? Don't know. Called suffix nigon betchila. If he isn't yet declared a mitzayra, tahar is pure. Achla niskak l'toma, because none of them became tamei yet. What happens if both of their nigam grew? Mishan is now both of their nigam are the size of $50. Now they're both tamei for certain, right? They're both mitzayron, $50 size nigam. They go in, they're muchlat, they're kicked out of town, they have to stay outside of the town. Now the nigam start shrinking. One of them is now a quarter. We don't know which Reuven is a quarter. One of them is. Mishin is l'tumah sveka tamei. So now the presumption is his previous state is a state of tumah. None of them become tahar until we know for certain that who the one whose nega shrunk was. Minan immediately. What's the source? Amar Yehudah, Amar Rav, Amar Kra. The pasuk says, the first thing we do, the first thing the Torah says is tahara first. You try to make the nega tahar. Okay, hold on a second. If we're trying to make the nega tahar, if that's the case, if you're telling me that every suffix we automatically say is tahar, so why does it make a difference what his previous state was, whether he was not yet a mitzayra or whether he was a mitzayra? In both instances, we should say he's tahar. Okay, so the Gemara falls off of this source, and the answer is traditionally, whatever the source of chazaka is. What is the source of chazaka? It's a complicated question. It might also be from nega. When a kohen, the Gemara's best attempt at a source for chazaka mikara is that where a kohen sees a nega in the house, so he saw a nega in the wall of the house. They removed the stones. It came back. He goes. It grew. It's bigger. He goes into the house. He sees it grew bigger. He walks out of the house, closes the door. And now he's about to pronounce the house tamei. Hold on, maybe the nega just shrunk. And maybe as soon as the kohen turned around, the nega got smaller, and now it's not tamei anymore. How do you know the nega didn't get smaller from the moment the kohen turned his back until he left his house? And yet the Torah still says the kohen pronounces the house tamei. It must be that the Torah has chazaka d'mikara. The Torah respects the presumptive state. So because the status quo of when he left was that the nega was a certain size, presumably it didn't change from the moment he turned his back until he walked out of the house. Okay, so that's the source for this Gemara. Now this statement of Rabbi Yehudah, what was it said regarding? Once he becomes tamei, also we should say the suffix is tar. I'm sorry. I skipped the line. 1 second. The idea of Rabbi Yehudah was said at the following condition. In Baharas Kadmal Lavan Tamei. If the blemish comes before the white hair is inside the blemish, it's tummy. In other words, the white hair grew after the blemish appeared. This is some sort of leprous blemish. Again, you can see the Parshas Mitzvah for more details. We'll get to it very shortly after Pesach. But if the white hair becomes before the blemish, so first he has hairs that turn white, then a tsaras blemish appears, tahar. He's pure. And again, obviously, this is all spiritual ailments. Suffix, if we don't know which one comes first, tummy, it's tummy. Rabbi Yeshua says, kea, it's turned lighter. Well, what does that mean? My kea, what does turning light mean? Rabbi Yehudah, kea v'tahar. It turned lighter and it became tahar. So in other words, whether or not we have a doubt, if we have a doubt whether or not the white hair came first or the blemish came first, Rabbi Yehudah says you're tahar. V'dilma kea v'tamei. Maybe it means that it got lighter and now it's tummy. Torah says with regard to tsaras, first it mentions tahara, purity, and then it mentions tumah, meaning in a presumptive suffix, whether a specific blemish turned white, the hair is turned white before or afterwards. We give a presumption of tahara, that he stayed tahar, and that the source is this pasuk because the Torah puts tahara before tumah. Okay, we're at the Mishnah now. We'll give a little bit of background. We'll start the Mishnah tomorrow. Again, tomorrow, God willing, we'll finish the Masechta. Very much looking forward to this. Okay. Okay, so let's go through. We've discussed this in the past, Tumas Zov and Zava. They're the same type of Tumah, but they are very, very different. Zov is a male Tumah, Zava is a female Tumah. Zava is much easier. Okay, so a woman has cycles. Menstruation can either fall into a category of Tumas Nida, or it can fall into a category of Tumas Zava. If Nida continues beyond 7 days, we treat it as a Zava. The emission of Zava is exactly identical to Nida, and it's exactly what every woman experiences today. There's no secrets there. Today, every woman who becomes a Nida, technically speaking, we call it Nida, but actually we treat it as a Zava Gedola, as a woman who becomes a Zava. It makes no difference what the reason for that Nida was. So, for example, in the Megillah, Esther was shaken by fright and she got a period. It says, in other words, a sort of abnormal event happened and it caused her to menstruate. It doesn't make a difference why it happened, whether it was a sudden fear or whether it was a normal cycle. The emission, which is blood, it's dam, we know what it looks like, is tummy. It's very simple. Okay, when it comes to men, it's very complicated. There's an emission called Zava. We don't know what a Zava looks like. It's an emission that looks somewhat similar to semen. It is not semen. It's not a seminal emission. It's something like it. If you want to know the difference, Rashi tries giving a difference. You can I think it's Parshas Tazria. You can try to figure it out. It doesn't seem like anybody's figured it out yet. We don't know what it looks like. One of the major differences between a Zava and a Zov and a Zava, again, so a Zov is a male emission, something like a seminal emission, but it's not semen. It's not semen. Semen is called Shechva Zera. Okay, now
We don't see that today.
Shechva Zera we see, obviously.
No, I mean
but
yeah.
Zov is not something that we recognize as distinct emission. Okay, anyway, Zov happens only. We'll see that if there could be other ways that a Zav emission would appear. If the Zav emission appears twice, but because of a specific reason, we'll see what the reasons are. Maybe he jumped, maybe he ate too much, etc. We'll see other possibilities. The Zav emission would not become Tamei, except if it's the third one, in which case it becomes Tamei, even if there was a cause for it. Okay, and this is a background to tomorrow. We're finishing the session tomorrow.